I don't have power right now, so I may get darker and darker as it gets dark here. Hopefully the power goes back on, but it's kind of common if we have a storm or something here. I just live in the mountains, surrounded by cows, and all that kind of thing. But anyways, yeah, it's good to be here again. Um, I guess what we could do is just jump in and see who joins us. Yeah. So maybe we'll just start with just a short practice to settle in, gives people a chance to join in. We had quite a few last time, but I guess I scared everyone away. I'm just joking. All right, so just finding a posture that works for just a bit of practice. It doesn't have to be super serious. We're just going to do something very short, but generally just relax yet alert, spine loosely straight. You want to close your eyes or leave them open, whatever feels good to you. If you tend to connect with a practice of breath, that's fine here. Also, just allowing a little bit more presence, whether that's through an anchor like the breath or through another anchor, it could be the body, sound, something else, or just anchor less, just awareness, presence, and also noticing the quality of how we're meeting our experience. This is important, right? Sometimes it's difficult to bring practices like loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta out of the head if we don't actually know how to meet our own experience with a little bit of kindness. So, whatever's up for you, whether you're wide awake, tired, stressed, relaxed, whatever the case is, anything in between, just offering a little bit of kindness in the form of non judgment towards that. So, aware of feeling, noticing feeling, just allowing things to be. We don't have to become them to let them be. We also don't have to solve them or try to reject or figure it out or solve a particular predicament. So, another way to think of this is just a little bit of a warm smile towards your experience right now, whether we are enjoying that experience or not. Sometimes this comes in the form of acceptance, sometimes it comes in the form of just loving kindness, sense of warmth towards our experience. Now, of course, you can provide warmth towards yourself here too. Really, what is self? So, I think it's more interesting to provide it towards the contents of our experience, emotions that are present, thoughts, sensations. Of course, underlying all of this is an innate wish for happiness. I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning and thinks, wow, I want to be really unhappy today. I don't think there's anyone who thinks that. And of course, we get confused on the causes of happiness, but either way, the wish for it is there. So just recognizing that for yourself, wishing that for yourself, and wishing that for others, happiness and its causes. We can develop bodhicitta if we wish to in awakening for the benefit of all beings. A sense that not only do we wish them temporal happiness, but the ultimate happiness of peace, or Buddhahood, our Buddhahood. And that any Dharma discussion, meditation may move us towards awakening for the benefit of all beings. All right. Thanks so much for your practice. And maybe tonight we can try something I wanted to try last week. There's less of us here, but it's okay. We can see how it goes. Um, we'll have time for questions. So this isn't particularly like questions right now. More, it's sort of like themes or particular philosophical topics or particular practices or particular ways you've, you know, heard or engaged with the Buddha Dharma. What would you like to hear more on, basically? Like what kind of topics are up for you right now? Again, not a particular question, more like a theme, particular practice, mm, like that too. So you can maybe put it in the chat, and then I just can have it there kind of logged to read. And if you don't know this second, looks like Shella is going to give us something, and then the rest of you, if you want, um, please let me know. So this just becomes more engaged with what you're actually thinking about and working on, and in particular, like what you're practicing. That might be interesting too. So yeah, feel free to type it in the chat. Could be a word, could be a sentence, could be you know, something as simple as bodhicitta. Right? It could be so it doesn't have to, you don't have to think too hard. Something you want to hear a Dharma talk on, more or less. Attachment. Okay. Allowing myself to make room in my day for my practice. Great. A good one. Awesome. So let's we'll just jump in order and then see if more come in. So attachment. Well, non-duality. Okay. We talked a little bit about that last time, but we'll talk more. Great. Um, Actually, let me just wait and see what else comes in, because maybe there's a way to weave these together too. Okay, we'll go with that.
Victor, just so you're aware, we are putting ideas of things that we'd like to talk about in chat. If you want, you can go ahead.
Yeah, and as always, I love, people feel like, Shayla, thank you for turning your camera on. If you feel like turning your camera on, it's great, so I can kind of see you all if you want to. Awesome. So, hey there. How's it going? So, I think we can kind of go to some fundamentals and then sort of build from there and relate to all these three topics here. I might have said this last week. I can't remember what I said, but basically, the more I guess I encounter the Dharma in its many different forms, the more I see, the Buddha's first teaching, the Buddha's first teaching on the Four Noble Truths. It's not something we particularly study like a ton in Tibetan Buddhism. There's some study on it, in the monastery. They break it into 16 aspects and kind of study it that way. But either way, as I was going to say, the more I encounter Dharma, the more I study it, practice it. It seems like the Four Noble Truths was not just like the first teaching in the sense of like here's what's preliminary, and then that's it, and then it goes into like more advanced things. The Four Noble Truths are the more advanced thing. Like that's another way to think of it, right? I think of it more as like a system, like the Buddha was kind of laying out a system where all the whatever dharma we're practicing, whether it's Suchana or Vajrayana or whatever, can sort of fit into the Four Noble Truths, even though technically it's more of a um, Shravakyana teaching, right? First Yana, the Buddhist teachings. But either way, we can approach it from a Mahayana perspective too. We can approach it even, I think, from a Vajrayana perspective. So we all, maybe just to repeat, we have the first noble truth, the truth of dukkha, the noble truth of dukkha, or dissatisfaction. The second noble truth of its causes. The third noble truth of its elimination, and the fourth noble truth of the path that leads to that elimination, right? And in particular, I might have talked about this. I can't remember if it's this class or another class, but dukkha is not a prescriptive thing in the sense of like it's not just giving us information. I think one of the trickiest things these days is learning how to learn. Um, if you know what I mean by that, right? Like every subject has different ways to learn it, right? Different ways to engage with it, different ways to kind of derive benefit. And in the world today, I also think we're losing a lot of the ways, like different kind of learning styles. So I'll give you an example, like an old style of learning that existed throughout the world in many different cultures was more like the apprenticeship model. So like if someone is learning to make shoes, they would apprentice with someone and then sit by their side and learn how to make shoes over some years, right? And then of course they'd probably become part of that person's business and then maybe even take it over at some point, who knows, or start their own. But the point here is that's very much an experiential style of learning. It's not so much like, ask ChatGPT and here's all the information on how to make shoes, right? So like obviously AI is really good at that, and we'll continue to get better at that. But AI in particular, unless they figure out a way, maybe if it's like in a robot or something, I could see something happening where maybe there's some sort of exponential thing being passed on. But either way, a lot of our learning doesn't happen through information. It happens through watching each other, in particular human behavior, right? And a lot of communication is nonverbal. Most communication is nonverbal. I think there was some number I heard on that where like only like less than 10% was verbal with communication. A lot of it was all kinds of other stuff, body language, etc. So in Buddhism, we also have way more kinds of communication too. We have communication through transmission, through gesture, through symbol. There's all kinds of ways of learning and communicating. So, anyways, so going back to the first noble truth on dukkha, we it's not really information. Yes, you can kind of look at it like that when we initially encounter it. Like, we study the three kinds of dukkha, right? The dukkha, the dukkha of change, and all pervasive dukkha. We study the six realms. So, some of you, if you're not familiar with this, you can just put it in the chat. I don't know what you're talking about. And I'll go into detail. I'm assuming you guys kind of have some Buddhist study, right? You kind of know generally what I'm talking about. But if you really don't, let me know. And then I can kind of answer it right on the spot. Um, so either way, we have like some framework for understanding what dukkha is, because dukkha, like, we try to translate that word. It's a little bit tricky. It's suffering is really a poor translation, because in English, suffering usually represents something more gross, meaning like mental, physical, or emotional suffering, like pain. But dukkha doesn't just, it includes that, but it also includes much more. It also includes sort of just like malaise. I don't know. Uh, Something not going our way, but we're not super pissed about it. We're just sort of like a little bit bummed out. Dukkha. Um, I don't know. Having to eat, dukkha. Having to talk, dukkha. Right. So like we wouldn't normally think of these kinds of things as dukkha. And for some people, they then sort of get a bad taste where they're like, oh, everything's a bummer in Buddhism. Everything's suffering. And so it's a little bit of like, the problem is I can see how people go there because they're not maybe taught the rest of the noble truths, right? And importantly, like the second one and third one. But either way, the the exploration here, or the experiential aspect, not the informational aspect, is basically exploring life and seeing what is life. Mm, what is like the theme what is something that pervades life? And of course, it's not all doom and gloom. We have wonderful moments too that we enjoy. There's very like beautiful human experiences that happen. Yes, the Buddha would also put them in the category of dukkha, but it's sort of missing the point. For me, it's we what the whole teaching on dukkha is pointing out a way of being, a way of engaging with oneself in the world that is actually a dead end, right? And so and a dead end, what a dead end means, it's not the end, or it's not everything sucks. It's saying there's a dead end, and once we see a dead end, we can find another way around, right? We can find another way out. And that's really the purpose of the First Noble Truth, to really explore all of the roadways of what we think provides happiness in life, and to explore, are those really providing a lasting happiness or not? Because of course we know many things provide temporal happiness, like a happiness that comes and goes, right? So no denial of that, and some of that is nothing wrong with that. It's just the problem is if we're continuing to just have these hits on temporal happiness, on temporary happiness, and we're not recognizing there's possibly a happiness, in this case, liberation, or actually the third noble truth, the elimination of suffering. If there's not a recognition that's even possible, then life becomes kind of depressing. Most people I know, I don't know a lot of people, as they age, they get happier. Like I've even noticed this myself. The dukkha actually compounds as we age. So when we're young, this kind of teaching's like, what are they talking about? Everything, it's not that bad, And of course, we see like things we don't like, and we experience things we don't like. But as you age, actually, things compound. And then, unless someone's practicing with their mind and finding some real meaning within their heart and mind to life, often people become sour and bitter. That's why often you get this kind of, I know a lot of people in their elder years, including Dharma practitioners, who are bitter. Why? Because the suffering compounded, and they weren't working with their mind in the right direction. They were continuing to pursue a dead end. That's not a judgment. That's just sort of, you know, I don't know how to say it. We have to kind of recognize what are the dead ends, and then through the Dharma recognize actually there's other options for engaging with life, and it has nothing to do with what we do outwardly. It has everything to do with how we engage with our mind and emotions and sense of self and all that, right? But of course, after this first noble truth, which we explore and we examine, we have the second noble truth, which basically is pointing out, well, what is causing that first noble truth? And generally, we could say like karma and afflictive emotions, right? And so, I think Kathleen put it out there. Um, these main afflictive emotions are five, but we could really say they really are three. We have attachment or clinging, we have aversion, and then we have ignorance, right? We have or misperception. In Tibetan, they use the term marikpa, which is like a misknowing or a misperception. And so, based on that, we then create actions based on a belief in a truly existent self, a truly existent other. And then that creates ripples, which Buddhism calls karma. But essentially, karma is just ripples of energy in sort of illusory space time that, within the dreamlike experience of life, we then have to experience the dreamlike cause and effect of karma, right? But it's all related to, um, more or less, our sense of how we solidify and reify identity and reify perception, and then have reactions or responses, right? And these reactions come in the form of clinging, aversion, or attachment, aversion, based on a misperception, right? Let me just see what happened in the chat here. If I Okay. Um, so that's really primarily what the second noble truth is pointing out. But of course, it's also pointing out the fundamental misperception, which relates to Buddhist non-duality, of duality, right? of taking our experience and because of a strong habit pattern, it splits into subject and object, which the Buddha said is not real. Like that's not how reality is actually functioning. It's not functioning in subject and object. It's functioning as sort of open dimensional. Maybe I'll put it that way. Because, if we're going to say, well, what's beyond subject and object? Emptiness, right? But emptiness is not nothingness. It's an open dimensional. It's this sense there's no findability to anything, yet it continues to appear, right? And as long as there's karma, the samsara will continue to appear. When that's exhausted, what they call the wisdoms and kayas will start to appear, what Buddhas actually experience, right? But anyways, I'm kind of going too advanced here. So the point is, when we're working with attachment, we're working, just as, when we're working the second noble truth, the causes of dukkha, it's fundamental. It's not just sort of a singular attachment. It's not a singular thing of like, oh, I really like this type of cake. It's more of a fundamental behavior of how we cling to what we like and how we push away what we dislike, right? So aversion and attachment are just sort of fundamental to um we could say it like when the mind gets confused, when the mind is confused and caught in circling in samsara, the ways it expresses itself in reaction are through attachment and aversion. And I think a really nice way to work with attachment, or was the thing, let me just look this again. Yeah. A really nice way to work with attachment is more or less to grow the skills in meditation to watch the mind. This is really important because we could sort of talk about the disadvantages of attachment and study it more from a philosophical perspective. But the main point is we have to learn to recognize it. And what I would argue is we also have to learn to recognize that it sucks. And I'm sorry to use like kind of like, too colloquial of a language here. But really, this is like a real key point. Attachment anger is a little bit easier because when we get angry, when we have aversion, it doesn't feel good. It's painful, right? Like for most people, unless we feel very self-righteous like in the moment. But generally, it doesn't feel good to be angry, right? We feel tense, we feel agitated. In a way, we might react to try to get rid of the anger, right? Because we just want to be done with it. It's painful. Attachment is painful too, but it's harder to recognize because it's like a razor that's coated in honey. So it seems when we get the object of attachment, it seems like, oh, I have it now. I have the answer. That this is, in the moment, like the way it feels is this is not a dead end. I this is forever happiness. And again, we have to kind of question our minds and sort of emotions at that point. It's difficult to see because conceptually, philosophically, we'd be like, that's ridiculous. I'm going to eat this piece of chocolate. It's going to bring me pleasure for a few moments and then it's going to be done. Like most people know that conceptually, but we don't act like that. You see what I'm saying? And this is because of the very slippery nature of attachment, which is very difficult to uproot because it continues to deceive us by, first of all, kind of like making our discernment very murky, right? And then, at the same time, it's like we forget that, oh, that didn't work out, or we just deny it, right? Because the high from the chocolate finishes, and we were like, we're like, okay, and then the next day, the same craving comes, the same attachment, and we repeat the same thing, thinking to get a different result, right? So this is the nature of attachment, and it's very challenging for that reason, right? But of course, the first step is recognizing it is a delusion, it is afflictive emotion. The second step is, I think, some kindness, which is it's not a personal flaw. This is one thing I think we have to be careful with when we're discerning afflictive emotion in our minds and hearts is it's not like something you made a mistake on. It's not your personal flaw. It's the nature of samsara itself. If we are a samsaric being, we are going to have ignorance, attachment, aversion, pride, and jealousy, the five afflictive emotions, right? But of course, what comes with those? What's their nature? The five wisdoms. So we also have other options. This is in particular in Vajrayana, but it doesn't matter. The point is the ways we're perceiving, the ways we're reacting through those five afflictive emotions, the, at their essence, how do you say it? There's nothing wrong with us. It's just a misperception within the particular energy itself. Because attachment, it's more than a thought. It's more than how do you say it? It's not. We call it an afflictive emotion because there's other kinds of emotions that are more surface. Where attachment and aversion, they're kind of more embedded with our being. I don't know how to put it. They're a little bit more sticky in that way. Now, of course, in Suchiyana Buddhism, we're trying to tame them. We're trying to, I don't know, recognize their emptiness, their non-dual nature, etc. But with non-duality, with Buddhist non-duality, we're not separating the two truths, right? So Buddhist non-duality has everything to do with recognizing the nature of how things are, right? Again, recognizing its nature, recognizing what is its essence, recognizing, in one way we can approach it by, okay, its essence, we're trying to recognize the lack of inherent existence. But when we recognize the lack of inherent existence of, let's say, attachment, when we're experiencing it, it doesn't mean it disappears because that would actually be separating the two truths. That would actually be going against the Buddhist teachings, essentially, right? So, a lack of seeing a lack of inherent existence, which is Buddhist non-duality, or lack of independent existence. There's many ways we talk about it. It's not a nothingness. It's not a void. And at the same time, how you say it, there's something that can arise within the appearance when it's freed. So this is a different way to think of attachment, right? So normally we think, how do I get rid of my attachment? I don't know. I don't personally think it's possible, and or maybe even, mm, I'll put it this way. I think when we shift the question from how do I get rid of my attachment, more towards like, how do I understand its nature and or experience a transformation of it? Now we're getting into something I think worthwhile to pursue, right? Attachment is painful, causes us and others a lot of suffering and dukkha. But at the same time, if we understand its nature, if we understand that it's empty of true existence and that it itself is just an appearance in the myriad of billions of trillions of appearances we can have, but we can see that at its core, it's really nothing whatsoever, right? It's like space. When we can see that, then we start to become free. And then the third noble truth becomes possible, right? The truth of elimination. Now, I'm giving more of like a Mahayana Vajrayana presentation on the Four Noble Truths, but typically in the Shravakyana teachings, when they say truth of elimination, they mean that directly, meaning, there is this perspective in some of the Shravakyana teachings, the foundational teachings of the Buddha, that when you become liberated, it would be similar to putting this candle out. The consciousness just, boom, gone. In Mahayana and also some other Theravada schools, they disagree. That's not the case. It's not that the consciousness ceases; it's the dualistic consciousness that ceases. Right? It's the consciousness that's misperceiving itself as something, other things as something, and then splitting, as I said, into a subject-object duality. That ceases, right? Because that's not real. That's not reality. That's something put on top of the reality, right? A perception that you can think of it as like a very ingrained habit pattern we've carried from life to life. Um, so, so in this sense, from more Mahayana perspective, when we're talking about the elimination, we're talking about the elimination of the misperception, right? And the same goes for attachment or aversion. We're not eliminating attachment. We're eliminating the misperception, which reduces which eliminates the klesha. The attachment ceases, that energy of attachment ceases to be a klesha, and then it can start to move into actually being a wisdom. So, which is more of a Vajrayana principle. So we have the transformation or the alchemy of these five afflictive emotions into the five wisdoms, right? When someone becomes enlightened. But anyways, I'm just kind of giving a different presentation here because it's sort of like sometimes we can make an enemy out of attachment when actually the energy of attachment is kind of important. It's just what's the part of it that becomes painful and causes samsara, the hook in the attachment, the energy directed in strange and sort of I don't know, kind of illusory ways, that has to be remedied or worked with, right? So so Shella, you're saying something about, allowing myself to make room in the day for practice. I know that's like a very practical question, and I'll get to it. It's a more practical question. But I think, yeah, the fourth noble truth, this is what it's talking about. It's sort of like the fourth noble truth is, how do we do all this? How do we first of all, how do we start to experience our relationship to dukkha, what dukkha truly is? How do we develop a proper renunciation mind towards it? And then how do we recognize the true culprit of dukkha or suffering, which is, karma and afflictive emotions and primarily ignorance? And then, of course, we can start to see the possibility for the third noble truth, the truth of elimination, of eliminating samsara, basically, like eliminating, not quite eliminating samsara, eliminating the confusion, the division. And then we have the fourth noble truth, which is the actual path, right? And there's so many ways to talk about this. Generally, in Mahayana, we have, uh, uh, sila. You can either say sila or uh, I translate it as discipline because ethics can be a little bit mm, can get a little bit confusing. So discipline, like the discipline towards conduct, like eliminating what's causing harm and increasing what's causing benefit. Discipline towards that. The second pillar could either be samadhi, like meditation, or compassion. Sometimes in the Mahayana we say the second pillar is compassion. And then the third is prajna, right? The developing the wisdom, the insight to cut through what is an actual misperception, right? So discipline, compassion, and prajna. So, and then of course we can also talk about the eightfold path and the Shravakyana, and then Vajrayana. They have other ways to relate to these three or eight. So either way, this is about how to engage with our minds. Like when we say practice, yes, we have like all kinds of skillful means and different systems and techniques and ways of sitting, ways of working with the mind, ways, mantras, aspirational prayers, contemplative or analytical meditations. There's so many techniques and different, skills we develop, which are fine. They're all kinds of different doorways to exploring um, more or less, these things I was describing, exploring the first two noble truths. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to working with the mind and using what we know, and of course, growing the skills we don't know to do that in a more skillful way, right? To be able to work with our mind, to transform it, to recognize where we're bound, and to start to, remove some of that bondage, right? So, so in a way, I think making room for the fourth noble truth, which is really the path, right? The practice. I think, we usually have two forms, like we have formal and informal, or I usually put them into two forms. We have our formal daily practice where we might sit more deliberately, and then we can have informal practices that we integrate throughout the day. Now, from the perspective of like, if we really want to make progress on our path, both are important, but at the same time, I think a lot of this is about turning our life into Dharma, right? So, a lot of this comes down to, especially as modern practitioners, we often make the mistake of fitting the Dharma into our life, right? We think of like Dharma as like another thing we do, or it's sort of, this hobby, this thing that I think is meaningful, but I'm like fitting it into my life. No, no, no. What we actually have to learn to do, and I'm not saying this comes easily, it comes usually over years, is we actually have to fit our life into the Dharma. It's the opposite, right? We don't fit the Dharma into life. We make our life the Dharma, essentially. And so when we approach it like that, I think there's other kinds of questions and kind of curiosity that can come up, right? Meaning, okay, what does that mean for me right now? Because mean that won't mean the same thing for you, all the time. It'll mean something to you right now, and you'll try it, and then it'll grow and it'll change, right? And then, you never know. At some point in your life, you're just resting in the view, of emptiness all day long. Some people are like that. They just started out, they do a little, they have a, block of time in the morning for their formal practice, maybe a block of time at night. Then they're like, you know what? That's not enough. I need to sort of connect with Lojong throughout the day. I need to remember bodhicitta throughout the day. Um, and then slowly they study emptiness. They start to learn a little bit on it, about emptiness. They start to meditate on it, and. But then they realize Vipassana is not confined to a technique, right? Vipassana is, basically anything that produces the insight into the nature of reality, its impermanence or emptiness or non-dual nature. But Vipassana is not combined. It's not confined to a technique. It's anything that does that, right? So once we become skilled, our whole day can be used with awareness, with mindful awareness, exploring the mind, exploring what is reality. There's so many ways to do this, right? So of course we want to study kind of like what are the classical ways. And then in our own life, we can experiment. Once we know the container, we can experiment within the container a little bit, right? And I don't mean, a lot of people, sometimes the problem becomes they don't learn the container well enough, and then they start mixing other containers with Dharma container. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, oh, well, these mushrooms are helping me a little bit, so maybe that's Dharma now. Nothing wrong with taking some psychedelic mushrooms. It's just not the same thing, different container, right? Of course, for a practitioner who's very evolved, everything's the container of Dharma. That's my point, right? But until we're at that place, we have to be a little bit selective. Of course, we're working in a lineage here, and we work with that container. But once we know it, there's some fluidity and personalization there. You see what I mean? Like, so I'll give you an example. So, like, I can be attached to personally to like sort of organization, like things being organized and sort of clean and things like that. And now, for some years, but now having a small daughter, it really kicked in. I just sort of let things be chaotic and funky. Like the worst thing for me is like dishes that have sat there all day and not been cleaned. Like that really, literally, a part of me almost like can't breathe when I look at that. But in about maybe like 6 months or a year of like letting that happen here and there, I don't, I can breathe now when I see that. I can kind of be relaxed around that. So these are the little mind trainings that, like, that's very personal to me, right? Like, so what am I working with there? I'm working with attachment. I'm also working with aversion. I'm also working with sort of like fixed beliefs and ideas. So the process of the Dharma is to become very relaxed with a lot of compassion and wisdom, right? So that's kind of like another clue here on a daily basis. Besides our formal practice, we're cultivating, you know, the the areas where we're tight, where we're rigid, the areas where we're fixated. Those are the areas to go to, to work with Lojong practice, transforming through bodhicitta, transforming through emptiness, or just mindful awareness itself, which I often use as the gateway. So yeah, I think I'll wrap it up there, but we can do some Q&A based on anything that came up for you during that. The non-duality piece got weaved in, so I didn't exactly speak to that directly.
I think I get all consumed in the formality of, everything has to be, the formal. I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that. That's where
Yeah.
I'm getting stuck.
Yeah, I can relate to that. That's how it was for me for some years. Do you do you just sit and meditate like without doing a particular form?
Completely frozen at this point. Yeah. I'm just stuck.
Say more about stuck in.
I'm just stuck in not starting. I'm just, it's like a frozen at this point. Yeah. So I do like that idea where you talk about, just relaxing into these moments of aversion or attachment. I like that because that seems a lot easier than
Yeah,
opening
relaxing
up
with
a
a.
book, finding, where it says in the Lamrim that I've got to,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
you
I
know
see
what
what
I'm
you're saying.
saying, and then study
Yeah,
that, and then what
yeah,
that's where I'm getting
yeah.
stuck.
Okay, got it, got it. Okay, so yeah, maybe again, for me, it's just sort of I see it with that's happened to me before, like within my own experience, and so it may not be the exact same. I just want to say I can relate to that to a certain degree, and there's a couple things that really help, and mm, how to say this for someone for when that's happening to someone, I actually feel we need to kind of do the opposite. So sometimes we're letting the like conceptual ideas lead the way of like trying to be correct in a certain way with the ideas. But the problem is like we have to get to know the ideas experientially through meditation. So it's a little bit of like chicken and egg problem, but 100% it's sort of like it's a little bit of a Tibetan Buddhist issue because Tibetans were, I don't know, how many of you have experience with Tibetans. And it's changing now, just with the diaspora and kind of the modern world. But we're talking like, old school Tibet, like pre-cultural revolution, right? Pre-1950s. And you can meet some of them who still come out of Tibet, and they are, generally some of the like not the Tibetans who live in exile. I mean the ones like from East Tibet and stuff like that. You meet them pretty fresh out of that experience, and they're in Nepal or India or whatever. Um, I don't know how to put it. It's there is you meet someone who a lot of people sometimes mistake that Tibetans have more realization than they do because sometimes we think just being like a really chill and nice person means you have realization, but they might or might not, but it just means they're Tibetan, like they're grounded, they're a little bit more in their body, they're more chill. And I'm not I'm it's a general blanket statement, so I don't mean to generalize, and I'm really referring to like sort of old school, like like living simply on the mountain with your yaks, you know what I mean? There's a certain groundedness, there's a certain openness, there's a certain things aren't rushed, they're not coming from all of the stress and difficulty of living in the modern world yet. But of course when they move to New York they become like us 100% because they're just they're humans. But either way, so I'm not romanticizing, I'm just using this as an example to make a point, which is when we read traditional Buddhist texts, they're mostly written hundreds of years ago, and so they are speaking to that person. So I just want you to imagine a person super chill, relaxed, they got to do a little bit of work. They have their family, playful. They live close to nature, most likely. There's not a whole lot of like worries, I guess, to put it, And again, I'm generalizing, but very different than how we live and very different from how we were raised and grew up. Anyways, and just imagine that person, encounters a Lama and the Lama is trying to encourage them to practice. They're going to use language that's forceful sometimes because that person is pretty chill. They don't, it's not like they have a lot of ambition, you know? And so some of the language, some of the ways it's formed in traditional Tibetan Buddhism can be for that kind of person, like someone grounded, very earthy, close to nature, very chill. They don't have they don't have like lung problems like we do in the modern world, things like that. When they're talking to that kind of a person, it the teaching penetrates, and the fear that's sometimes used in teaching, the sort of, I don't know, lists, the emphasis on correctness, the emphasis on, I don't know, learning something, it goes in the right direction, and that person maybe does like 50% more practice, right? So they work a little harder, right? It gets them moving. For someone like us, who generally most of us have a lung disorder and stress and constant busyness and fear and anxiety and lots of other issues that, as I said, these people most likely didn't have to deal with in that particular period in time. When we read those things, they trigger all of our learning habits, all of the ways we tend to internalize information and sort of, and then we push 200% and then we can burn out, right? So it's very common. So it's not a it's a difficult thing to work with. But what I recommend is more meditation, learning how to relax with awareness in the right way. Right. So relax here doesn't mean be relaxed. It means the right amount of effort in the body, using the right speed, like speed limit in the body, and then emphasizing awareness. So I'll give you an example. So for some time in retreat, when I was working on shamatha, I was pushing the practice. So this might be another way to talk about it too. I was like pushing to get the concentration, and it's like taking two hot, pieces of metal, pushing against something, trying to refine it. That did not work for me. That probably set me back years in progress, to be honest. And no one was like, no one told me that. No one like, you can read teachings on shamatha, and sometimes they're like more like, you know, again, emphasizing this pushing element to it, right? Being pushy with the practice. But again, they might have been talking to someone with a very different nervous system than me. But the moment I realized, oh, there's other kinds of methods of shamatha where you can actually learn to relax in a more open way with awareness. And I found the right amount of effort, right? Maybe that's another way to put it. We need effort, but we need the right amount for our nervous system. And to get the result, we also need the result. So the moment I found that, wow, it just completely transformed my meditation. And then I never went back, including I personally don't recommend pushing oneself into belief, pushing oneself into certain practice. The point is to understand the mind. And the point is to use the Dharma to understand the mind. But a lot of the kind of stuff, Jello, what you're describing, it's more a nervous system thing. So bringing the lung down, connecting to the body a little bit more, learning how to relax with awareness. So we're still practicing genuinely. We're not kind of doing some new age spa practice, right? Because that's not what I'm intending. So yeah, there's the best resource, 100% that's out there right now is from Sokni Rinpoche, who's a friend of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and Fully Being, his course called Fully Being, excellent for this kind of thing. Fullybeing.org is the website. So I don't want to take you guys out of this, but just for this particular issue, Shella, there's three core practices he teaches that really help with this particular issue. And maybe it's sort of like in the interim, before you learn these other techniques, it's more like relaxing around the correctness a little bit, which may be I don't know if that resonates or that's something you struggle with.
Yeah, I'm on high alert all the time. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's yes, I think you've nailed it right there. I do need to just yeah, just figure out how to relax
There's
and
also a book, Why We
be in my
Meditate.
body.
Yeah,
What is
exactly.
it?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, what you just said is correct. Yeah. Why We Meditate is also a book. So if his course is Fully Being, but the book's really good too. Just called Why We Meditate. But yeah, this is kind of very typical when we're doing a lot of, we bring our nervous system, obviously. So it's not the Dharma's fault. But then when we engage with study without understanding how to be in the body and cultivating awareness more strongly within that, I don't know if the study just creates a lot of namto, a lot of thinking, a lot of like, so this happens to happen to me. It happens to a lot of people. And yeah, just a little bit of augment the Dharma can, then the study kind of becomes very meaningful, and the points and the complexity. It's like, it's the lung is going fast. The lung is the wind energy in the body. So when we learn to bring the wind energy down, and the nervous system will follow, it just feels like there's more space. So what felt like sort of overwhelming starts to feel more doable, more like less complex, right? So a lot of it is the speediness. Sokne Rinpoche calls it speediness, right? But it's really lung. Yeah. Yeah, but reach out if you want more resources. But those are great. Why we meditate, fully being. Yeah, I do about my YouTube channel. There's a bunch of guided meditations, things on that kind of stuff. I was afraid someone's going to ask this. Talk a bit more on the five wisdoms in a simple way, if possible. Thanks. How do we apply them in our daily practice? Okay. So the five wisdoms, they're not really applicable to the daily practice. They are the results of of more or less realizing emptiness, right? And so let me pull them up. Um, Give me 1 second. I could just tell you what they are. This is very, very deep Vajrayana topic, so not easy to really talk about. Here we go. So, but I'll give you a process here to sort of understand them a little bit more. Okay. So first I'll just name them and then name their corresponding klesha. So this is a bit difficult to understand, but it's sort of in the vein that I started in. So I should probably say something more. So thanks for asking it. So the idea here is each of the five main kleshas or afflictive emotions, right? We have ignorance, anger, pride, they say desire here, but attachment and jealousy, right? So you all know those. I think you all know those five main afflictions. So their wisdom nature is not different, right? So this is what's very tricky here. So when we say the five wisdoms, they're connected to the purification or the liberation, would be another way to put it, of the five kleshas, right? And so I'll name them and then I'll say a little bit more about what I just said. So when ignorance or marikpa is liberated or purified completely, that transforms into what's called dharmadhatu wisdom, the wisdom of the expansive reality, seeing things as they are. And that makes sense, right? Because ignorance is the masking of how things are, right? It's the complete, there's like a veil between us and how things actually are. And so when it's removed, when it's transformed, it becomes its, opposite essentially, which is seeing things as they are, more or less seeing the nature of reality, how it is, right? And that we call dharmadhatu wisdom. The second, anger or aversion, when that is purified fully and or transformed, it transforms into what's called mirror-like wisdom, mirror, like a mirror. And this because it's clear, it's something it's an experience that's clear, non-reactive, and can reflect all phenomena, just like a mirror. So here we're using words to describe realization. So don't take this quite literally, right? When that's kind of the point I was making. These five wisdoms are when someone is a realized being, when they fully have realization of emptiness and a bit beyond that. So mirror-like wisdom is the alchemical process, the purification of the parts of anger that are diluted. But the energy of anger can express itself. The energy that was anger, maybe that's a better way to put it, can express itself as mirror-like wisdom, right? This non-reactive reflection of all phenomena. I'm talking about in the mind. The third one, pride, it transforms or purifies into the wisdom of equality, recognizing the fundamental sameness of self and other, right? And this makes sense because pride is the sort of obscuration of that. When we're prideful, we feel higher or lower than someone else, right? Where this is the complete equanimity. The fourth one of attachment is when it's purified or transformed, it gets purified into what's called discriminating wisdom, knowing each thing clearly and individually without grasping, right? So remember, I said earlier, this is one feature of attachment that really makes it difficult to work with because attachment obscures our discernment, right? Like when you really, really want something and you're really like single-minded, single-focused on, I want this thing, it's very difficult to see its negative aspects because our discernment has been sort of sidelined. But when the samsaric elements of the energy of attachment are removed through realizing emptiness, it upgrades into discerning wisdom, right? Or sorry, discriminating wisdom. So then five, jealousy or envy, when this is purified, it transforms into all accomplishing wisdom. effortless, spontaneous activity for the benefit of others, right? Which makes sense because the obscuration part of the energy is jealousy, which is again sort of, a misperception about like, that person has more than I do, or, somewhat, has something I want or is better than me, and I'm jealous. So yeah, so you can go research these, but basically those are the five wisdoms and they're correlating klesha. But as I was saying, the main point is that these are not, from a Vajrayana perspective, they are not different. Uh, they're not the same as the klesha, but they're also not like, we're not talking about something else. Just like, I think when we get into the more refined explanations of what awakening is, um, it's a removal of what's obscuring Buddhahood. It's not some sort of thing over here. That changes it quite a lot when we think of it that way, right? Often we think of like enlightenment as some sort of other identity. That would be total delusion. That would be horrible. Just imagine what it would be like to be like, I don't know, now you think you're perfect, but you're identifying as that. That's worse than our experience right now, right? You see what I'm saying? At least we have some doubt because we're not perfect. We have some doubt about, you see what I'm saying? So enlightenment's not another identity. It's the dissolution of all identity. And we just start to enter the flow of how things actually are. So the same thing happens with the afflictive emotions, right? I mean, again, the afflictive emotion has been purified, but there's an energy, a wakefulness within it that can actually, become a boon to a Buddha, right? I guess I'll put it that way. But it's a difficult concept because it's more Vajrayana concept. Anywho, anything else? Yeah, Jay.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I was a little bit surprised when you talked about getting older and the ramifications. For me, it's been the opposite.
Oh,
It's
good.
like, yeah, it's surprised me. No, it hasn't surprised. There was part of it that was a decision. My grandmother would say many times, getting old is hell. Yeah? And I was an adolescent at the time, and I thought, no, I'm going to have a different approach for that. But the other thing that's happened is that my cravings, my desires are so much less. I'm less stressed, and I'm actually happier as a consequence. So I
Wonderful.
just, yeah, yeah. So it's interesting to me that different people have such different reactions to how life is. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's true. And thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I didn't mean to generalize like that. But do you know a lot of people in their and we call them golden years now. I'm not sure. Do you know a lot of people, let's say over 65, who are kind of like you, or do you tend to see something a little bit different or like a
I tend
mix?
I tend to see my kind of folk.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Oh, interesting. Oh,
Yeah,
that's good.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've got two workmates. We're in the same age group and similar situations. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All right. Well, I'm
Interesting.
gonna I'm gonna hope for that. Definitely for me in my mid 40s, it is compounding,
Wow.
more. But that doesn't
Wow.
make me unhappy. It's just
Yeah.
it's just how do you say it? It's not like things get, maybe another way to put it is like there's different challenges that come up, right? And
Yeah,
so,
to be sure.
you know, yeah, and sort of like anything I haven't worked with skillfully in the past is like not, how do you put it? It doesn't get better by ignoring it. Let me put it that way, right? That's what I
Yeah.
meant by compounding.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But good. Yeah,
But no,
thanks for sharing that.
and I realize that I'm fortunate in many ways. I'm pretty healthy and yada yada. But yeah, and of course, I have access to all of this wonderful wisdom and knowledge that's available through Zoom, of course. So that too
Yeah, and I
gets,
think yeah, and probably I'm guessing like a little more free time than maybe
oh my
earlier in.
word.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's incredible. That is absolutely an incredible blessing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wonderful. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's wonderful. Yeah. And I hope I'm wrong and your case is more the norm. That, I guess I look to some of my family members who are in their like 70s, 80s, and again, they haven't worked much with their mind. like throughout their life. They haven't focused on their spiritual life as much as maybe you did, Jay. And so they're, you know, it's I just noticed a lot more. It's not like, how to put it, kind of malaise, kind of like lack of meaning. I don't know. A little bit more like the parts of them that they didn't, that's kind of my point earlier. The parts of them they didn't work on became features of their personality, not things that were in the background 40 years ago. It's like sort of things I could see were happening for them 30 years ago, but they just came more into the forefront as they aged. And I'm not talking about like maybe some of their good qualities too, but more like things that um how do you say it? I can't think of the right way to put this. When you, maybe someone jump in if you want.
Grumpy old men or grumpy
Well,
old ladies.
yeah, exactly. Like that's what I'm referring to. But it's also like, oh, the filter. That's what I was looking for. Like the filter just drops away more and more. But again, that might depend on someone's cognitive health too. So that might be heavily dependent on that. Yeah. Anywho, good. Well, thanks everyone. This was fun. And hey there. I enjoyed chatting with you once more. Um, so next week I'll join you again, and yeah, we can kind of continue. Any topics you wanna are curious on, you could always send it over, or we can just do it spontaneous like we did today. Yeah, or I might be sort of have something. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.